before, got it.
Oh, you need to accept it.
I did. I said, got it. Before we switch into the slides, are there any questions about what we covered in the video between Al and Tamia and me?
I was a little unclear about the runners on the strawberries. I couldn't hear part of what he was saying. I gather that you should, if you have a good main crop, that you should cut off the runners because they'll take energy away from the main crop. Is that what he was saying?
Yes, you want the bed to fill in, but once it's filled in, those runners will root on top of each other. And so they create small plants, they create too much competition for just growing the plants rather than growing the berries. So yeah, so you don't want to cut all the runners off. You want to leave them go for a little bit until they fill everything in. Once they fill everything in, then start removing them.
Oh, thank you.
And with those, I've only done the fall planting once, and I couldn't remember how far. So at one point I said 8 inches, the other time I said 12 inches. I just looked it up on the website of the company that sells the berries, and it said 12 to 18 inches. I think 18 inches meaning spring planting and 12 probably fall, but that's on plastic too. Usually most farmers will plant on plastic in the fall. So I think 8 to 12 inches is probably a good range. Maybe 10 be the ideal.
Can I ask a
I
question?
concur with that, with like the, between 8 and 12 inches for planting in the fall, so that they can get established. And then, yeah, come spring, you're going to have a like super robust bed. Tom.
Yeah, me?
Yeah, I think you had a question.
I had a question now. When you were planting the winter squash, how many squash or cantaloupe would you put together in a small area? Plant in the same hole.
In the
I
same,
tend to do about 4. Sorry. I was just going to ask the same question, Ariana. You said the same hole. You mean in the same hill?
Yes.
Yeah, and in the same hill, I normally would do sort of 4 or 5, depending on the size of the hill. They and also obviously depending on how much space you have around the hill, because they're going to spread way out on you. So I think it's more so about, because at the root that they're not taking up as much space as they are going lengthwise and width. So I think it has more to do with the space you have in your actual bed, or that you have committed to them, than how much you actually have in the hill.
yeah. And there are, I would add to that, so there's one variety that I know of that will send, roots down along its runners. So there is this bone squash that can be used as, like if you harvest it young, it can be used like zucchini or a summer squash, but you can also cure it on the vine, and it's basically like a long neck butternut squash, and that will put down roots as it grows out. So yeah, it's a matter of what type of squash and its growth habit. I think
most of the hard winter squash, I find, tend to put down the roots along the vines, for sure.
Yeah, Tom, I have a different planting system than Tamia, and I think she's right. You can put a lot in a small area when doing hills. But I just do mine in line. It's in a raised bed, but one winter squash every 18 inches is what I do. And with melons, it's every 15. Usually melons don't take up quite as much space, so you can kind of transpose that to the space that you might need between hills if you're planting the hills situation.
Yeah, and depending on whether or not you're trellising, because that makes a huge difference.
That's true. I don't.
Yeah, and I think too, just before I switch over to sharing my screen for slides, I see in the chat, Woozy was asking, is it better to grow strawberries in their own bed, or could they be mixed with other perennials? Al, would you like?
Yeah, I would say in a bed. It's difficult to grow strawberries with other perennials. Strawberries are very susceptible to weed pressures because once the bed gets covered like that, there's no way to weed other than hand weed. So if you put it with other perennials, I think you're going to run into problems. And you should put them in an area that you know to be fairly weed free, quite weed free, especially not perennial weeds.
I've only ever tried it with one other plant, and that's rhubarb.
Right.
Rhubarb has those beautiful, giant, tall leaves, and it worked quite well. But I certainly wouldn't try it with anything else.
Yeah, I think it just gets a little bit competitive. So folks, I am going to share my screen with these slides. We're going to talk a little bit about seed saving and kind of prepping for the colder seasons. So can I get a thumbs up if y'all can see this, my slide that says seed saving? Okay, thank you. without other stuff on. I never know when I share my screen if you can see everything that I have open. So yeah, we have here in my hand some tomato seeds, right? And what is amazing is, so there are like, I think 100,000 global plant varieties that are endangered. So kind of this like, why bother saving seeds? And so we are in the midst of losing a lot of plant diversity, whether it's through the way that we cultivate, the way that we ruin places in the world, and all that. And there's kind of this lack or kind of just a lull in public awareness about how important plant diversity is for our future. If you want more information on this, I am not a scientist. I'm more of a designer and gardener. So, but there are some incredible resources. Even just the film Seed will give you a huge insight into kind of like what the importance of this seed diversity is. Conservation techniques, whether we're talking about the creation of seed banks or seed exchanges that happen between farmers or gardeners, or even like among different nations, those all play a really important role in preserving old or heirloom varieties of important food crops. One of the things that, like, if you do watch the film Seeds, like, you will see how, different cultivars of, whether it's corn or eggplant or cabbage have been reduced to just very, very small quantities. And so not only does, saving your own seeds help to improve agricultural biodiversity, because when you save seeds, right, you're saving this genetic seed bank. Like, you're not just saving one gene. Within each seed, you're going to get different characteristics. And so that is the best way to kind of ensure that there is a stable food source. But you can get involved in different seed banks. So I will let me continue before I get on my soapbox, as Alan to me, I will do. Seeds can be saved from open pollinated varieties, and so what that means is that unlike, for instance, like hybrids, which could produce sterile crops, they might produce something that reverts to a parent strain. So open pollinated varieties, so like your heirlooms and whatnot, you can save those seeds and get, and continue that line. Some crop species will pollinate themselves. And so those are things like tomatoes, peas, lettuce. So those are not likely to cross-pollinate, right? So they're not going to get, contaminated, so to speak, even if they're in the same garden. Others that might cross-pollinate, so squashes, brassicas, and such, those might, if you save those seeds, you're not going to necessarily get the same crop. So when you do save seeds, what you want to do is to look for kind of that healthiest, the most robust plant to save for seed, right? And so that's where we get into, like, we've always been looking for the strongest genetic traits, and it's the same in the case of saving these seeds. So just very briefly, I'm not going to go in at lengths here, but we can do questions at the end. Things that are easy to save. When I say easy, there are different processes, but so tomatoes, like, as you all know, I'm assuming you've all eaten a tomato. And so, like, when you cut the tomato, the seeds have kind of like a little bit of a gel around them. So you need to remove that before drying the seeds for the next year's planting. And so that actually is done through kind of this imitation of a fermentation process. So you can see on the screen just kind of the bullet points of how you do that. So you're going to put the seeds in a waterproof container, add some water, keep it out of sunlight, mix it up, and after a couple of days, the viable seeds will sink, right? So those ones that have the weight, they're going to kind of shed that gel substance, which will float, and anything viable is going to sink. And then you want to dry those and then store them before planting. Peppers, of course, you just want to make sure that you have allowed the pepper to fully change color, right? So you want to have mature seeds, whether you're talking about sweet peppers or chili peppers. Same with squash. You want to let that mature on the vine before, if you were to cut open a zucchini, right, you can't plant those seeds because they're not mature. Beans and peas are really super easy, right? So just let those mature on the vine. Cucumber, very similar to the squash. And then greens, so for radishes, lettuces, and whatnot, if you have let things bolt in your garden before, you'll notice they send up a flower stalk, right? Because they want to reproduce. So once the plant has gone to seed, you can put a bag over, like a little bag over that, and kind of shake the plant to retrieve the seeds. This is just a little bit of resource information. And then we're gonna scoot into, and I know that especially the image on the left is like, how can we even talk about snow while we're just recovering from a super heat wave? But now is the time to think about planning for the fall and the winter if you want to continue growing. And what's unique here in both New Jersey and also over there across the river in Pennsylvania. We have mild enough winters where we can really grow quite a lot. The first kind of thing that you need to pay attention to is kind of this frost date. And so we want to make sure that we know when. Sorry, and I hope that this noise outside is not going to be too distracting. Sounds like. So plantings for the fall, you know, while it's true that like the height of summer is not the best time to start seedlings of really anything, between having hot days, little rain, like heavy pest pressure and whatnot. But it is totally possible. And so they're saying like the first thing to know is kind of your first frost date. And from there you can kind of count back to when you should start particular seeds or setting out certain transplants. And so this chart kind of gives you a sense of when you need to set things out to get a good crop. And then are there any questions before I move into kind of this next segment? Okay. We can talk about a couple of different types of frost. And again, I know it's funny to think about these things while we're still in the midst of quite a bit of heat. But in terms of extending the season, right? So extending your own gardening season. I mean, the obvious benefit is that you get to eat fresh homegrown stuff for more of the year, right? The other things are that like when you grow during the cooler seasons, a lot of like warm weather pests or diseases kind of go away, right? And so you don't necessarily have the same kind of disease or pest pressure. And then finally, like you for some crops, exposure to cold, like for a lot of greens that might be typically bitter in the summer, they take on a sweeter kind of taste. You might hear that about carrots and whatnot. So let me get to our two types of frost, right? So we have advective frost. So that's when a cold front actually moves into the area and things just drop significantly below critical levels. So that's like totally out of your control. Radiation frosts, you know, we can pay attention to that because, you know, on a calm or clear night, that, you know, the clouds won't hold in that the warmth. Those are not as damaging, right? You can kind of mitigate those, and then you can take advantage of the fact that soil, when it's warmed by the sun in the daytime, it has this kind of radiant kind of heat that will continue into the dark hours. So in terms of ways to kind kind of mitigate some of the early fall, winter kind of daytimes, or I'm sorry, those temperature fluctuations. You can use floating row covers. Like I remember my grandmother would like put out sheets, right, like bed sheets, to kind of help mitigate with frost. And so as long as that fabric, so whether you use, you know, a floating row cover, so the image on the left where you can see my hand through the fabric versus, you know, a fabric that is more opaque, as long as that fabric remains dry, it works well. As soon as that fabric absorbs water, it can actually lead to not only like moisture issues on the leaves, right? Freezing on the leaves, and can actually have a negative effect. So you just want to make sure if you use a row cover that it stays dry. So for that, you know, removing it during the daytime so that the crops can get sun. Again, the row cover on the left, you can see like it allows light to transmit through. So you can use that throughout the season, whether it's for cold protection or for insect mitigation. I'm sorry, I have to plug in. I have to find my power cord. Any questions while I get my power cord? We'll talk about cloches next, which is another way to, on a very small scale, kind of extend season for individual plants. And you can do this either, you know, late in the season or early in the season. I often use this technique like for tomatoes, because I'm one of those people who puts their tomatoes out probably a few weeks before I should. And so I will often, whether it's using large canning jars or cloches like this, you can, you know, use, you can steal from your work and use these water bottles. But that's a great way to kind of move things into, especially into a season. Cold frames are a little bit more involved. You can see, have any of you used a cold frame before?
I think the plastic coverings take the place of the cold frames. When it gets really cold, I just put a higher, thicker layer of plastic over top of the cloth material, and I can garden all winter.
That's awesome. So Tom, you should maybe be teaching this class.
Yeah.
And Marion, it looked like you also have used cold frames. Oh, you're muted, so. Marion, you're muted. I would love to hear what you're saying.
Sorry. Yes, I have 2 cold frames, and I've grown lettuce and spinach all year round. Those are the only crops that I've tried.
Okay. Yeah, and they're, I mean, obviously, you know, where we are in terms of our zone, like, you know, we're not going to get tomatoes year round in a cold frame.
Yeah, I don't think so.
or in a high tunnel. We'd need a serious hothouse. But for those things, like even especially spinach, right? Like we can't even get that in the middle of June, July, August, because it's too hot. Those seeds won't even be happy to germinate until it's cooler. So cold frames, whether you do it in kind of a, you know, there's a number of different ways you can do it, whether you do it like, as Tom was saying, like you just put on different layers of, you know, the row covers, ultimately, you know, like cover it in different layers. But the important thing for the cold frames, like really you want the backside to be on the north wall. So that image on the bottom allows you in those colder months to capture. So if it has the angle from the back wall, that north wall to the south, that angle is gonna really maximize the sun exposure. And it's really remarkable to see like how, and Marion, you can probably speak to this, like, you know, how many greens you can be harvesting in, you know, January, February, just in, you know, a small space like this.
I think the best resource for winter gardening is Elliot Coleman's,
Yes.
winter harvest, something like that.
Yeah, he has his book that's called, I think it's called 4-Season Harvest.
Well, there's an earlier one that he did strictly for winter gardening.
Oh, okay. But yes, he's, you know, he's brilliant. And he has all kinds of resources there. So again, in this will be, I think, posted so that you can go back and look at this. And I know I'm paying attention to the time. I know Nikki says like, Ariana, you always talk way too long. So this is, you know, just about how, you know, how it can impact the temperature, moisture, and wind chill, right? And so the biggest thing really is that wind chill, right? So you want to protect those plants from the wind, and because that's gonna really kind of impact it. Just a little bit of managing of the cold frame. There are also other roads you can take, so doing low tunnels, right? So using plastic, or again, those more permeable fabrics, which are shown in the bottom left. So you can set up kind of low tunnels that help for insulation. There are very old traditional ways of kind of retaining moisture and heat in this kind of waffle garden system. I have not tried this yet, but I would love with my students to do a project to see, you know, just, you know, how two different plots function, both in water retention and then also season to season, kind of in this waffle garden. And then if you want to go big scale, looking back to this idea of the Walpini, so kind of this in ground, so you're pulling on not only solar, right? So you have the solar, but then you also have the geothermal heat coming up from the ground, and so you have this really stable climate. And I would love it if any of you want to construct one of these. I would love to come and help. I currently don't have the land to do this on, but it's sort of a dream of mine to have this kind of Walpini structure. So that is the end. I'm going to stop sharing. And I want to, you know, we have a little under 10 minutes, but if anybody has questions, comments, anything, please, let's have a little bit of a conversation before we say adieu.
I was going to say with the low tunnels, one thing that I do for the winter is I actually I have I have raised and in-ground beds. And on my raised beds, I actually affixed a hinged low tunnel that with handles that you just lift up. So it operates like a cold frame,
Mhm.
but it's actually a low tunnel
Awesome.
with you can put a single layer of plastic, or you can make it a double and just put a slightly taller low tunnel on top of that. And it's really
Mhm.
fantastic because it keeps you growing in the winter, but it also in the summer, gives you an early start. And then things like at the moment, I have ginger in there, which of course it's starting to cool down. So we'll close that up for the ginger to be able to sort of keep going for a while. So it kind of serves a double
Mhm.
purpose, both in the winter and the summer. So it's quite cool. Another way of eating in the winter if you have raised beds rather than in ground.
Yeah. No, I love that idea of how like combining those things where you can like actually like lift it off at the road cover, like so you kind of get like different like a whole series of protection.
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions?
Cheep, cheep,
Y'all are
cheep.
such a I know, I'm like, one of my cats is named Cricket, and it's like, did I just hear her chirp? So yeah, I mean, Al, thank you so much for your strawberry tutorial. That is super, super helpful. And I know just because I can see your faces, Marion and Tom, like you both seem like very expert gardeners. And I hope that there was something in tonight's class that was helpful. And for the rest of you folks, so Mary Ellen, Elise, Woozy, Jared, and Karen, thank you so much for joining us. And if there's anything we can help you with, please reach out.
No, thank you all for being with us.
Yeah, so thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I know I have probably Al and I, well, all three of us,
Yeah.
Tamia and Al, I need to jump off for another call. And so we look forward to seeing you next month.
Yeah,
and in the
excited about next
meantime,
month.
yeah, next month is going to be awesome. Lots of garlic, I hear.
Yeah, I was sitting out on the porch doing it. Actually, I'm like, oh my goodness, it's time to go. It's done curing. I'm getting it put away. I'm just stoked.
Yeah. So next month, Tamia is going to be the star of the show. She's going to talk about garlic, which is going to be amazing. And anyway, thank you all for joining us. And if you have any questions, just shoot an email to the NOFA group, and it'll get directed to whomever can answer your question.
Ariana, thank you so much for leading the way.
Yeah, I love seeing you all. Have a great night.
Okay.
Yeah.
Goodbye.
Happy August. See you in September.
Bye. Thank you.